WOL Radio.
Thanks for staying with us, folks. We're taking a look at the life and times of Malcolm X, El Haj Malik El Shabazz, better known. Number to call to speak to our guest, which is Baba Lumumba, is 800-450-7876. Before we left, we were talking about what shaped Malcolm, and I wanted to know from you, Baba Lumumba, from your research, was it the sign of the times, the civil rights struggle, the Vietnam War, whatever was going on in the country at the time, that shaped Malcolm, or did he just come into his own, organically?
Well, organically is interesting. We're all shaped by our times. We're all shaped by those influences that are around us. And I have obviously a list that I want to get into of these attributes and where they came from and why they're there and what made him who he is. So, when you ask a general question like that, I have, at least 10, 12 different answers. So let me start by saying one of the things we have to understand of Malcolm was the strength of his message. In other words, fundamentally, there's at least probably 3 or 4 different approaches to what we mean by freedom. Our black people thought we want to be free. Well, Malcolm's definition of freedom was independence. Malcolm was a black nationalist in the Garvey tradition, obviously, in the Elijah Muhammad tradition, in the tradition that we know and understand as black nationalism. That is to say, when we were released from our chains at one point, we had a choice. When somebody said, you no longer got these chains, so what you going to do? Are you going to try to go back to Africa and be who you were before we captured you? Or are you going to, in fact, just try to melt into the society that captured you? Is the choices of assimilation, sometimes referred to as integration, but I like the word assimilation, this point, and or black nationalism. Those have been fundamental choices. We have this history of movements around the two. And the interesting thing about that, it really isn't either or. Most black people tend to see things as, if I look at it this way, I'm wrong. Or right? No, there's a degree in which the assimilation then is just a process of making your life easier, getting a job, having some income, improving your life. So sometimes assimilating means just something good. Having a hospital when you're sick, having some getting a medical attention, having a place to live, essentially. That can be defined as, or in the case, for example, of Dr. King, getting rid of segregation, the humiliation of having to go to a different bathroom or a different water fountain or not being able to eat at a place and get rid of those indignities. That can be seen as assimilation. But the reality is the message of nationalism, the message that, in fact, the only way we can ultimately solve our problems is to have our own power base. And that really was the message of Marcus Garvey. Black people need a power base in order to compete with the rest of the world and protect ourselves against our adversaries, our tormentors, our oppressors, our enemies, whatever words you choose to use. But, the message of Garvey was that we needed a power base. And that power base needed to be on the continent of Africa. I don't generally, when I say Pan-African, I say because, it's really black unity. It's not necessarily uniting everybody on the continent of Africa, all the countries, because many of them are essentially Arab states who are sort of Arab nationalists. The reality is that Arab nationalists and African nationalists will never see eye to eye, so they won't unite. But so the unity of black people, a power base in Africa, the foundations of what Garvey talked about, that really go back to the fundamental question of what shall we do? How should we define our freedom? What is our goal? Is it to be a part of the system that oppressed us, that to assimilate into the system, or is it to create our own power base? Malcolm clearly stood on the side of creating our own power base. The interesting thing about that message, it was central to him. It was, even if you didn't agree with it, or didn't like the message, you understood that it was truthful. That fundamentally, if we're going to control our own destiny, we have to be in control of our own destiny. And that is a question of independence. There is no such thing as a liberation movement that doesn't seek independence. It doesn't exist. You can't have a liberation movement that just seeks assimilation, melting in, because that's a movement that says disappearing as a people is the answer. Well, disappearing as a people is never the answer. Being stronger as a people is the answer. Having a power base is an answer. And that was Malcolm's message. And part of the reason why he was so endearing, even though people feared him, was that they understood this truth. The truth of the fact of the matter is, ultimately, to solve our problem, we as a people have to be strong enough to stop people from abusing us. We can't ask them to stop abusing us. We see that now. We see that in the years since Malcolm died, we know fundamentally the situation has not changed. We're still being abused. We're still being used because simply asking our adversaries to stop oppressing us won't get them to stop oppressing us. Even, for example, Barack Obama. Many people see Barack Obama's elevation to the presidency as this triumph. But Barack Obama produced the Donald Trump, which is one of our worst nightmares. He sort of personifies the enemy, the adversary, the tormentor, the oppressor in many ways. So, one of the things I would say is the strength of this message was one of the things that was important to Malcolm. The other one, as Peter mentioned before, was the fact that his family was Garveyite. The fact that he stands for independence. He stands for a power base separate from, an alternative to throwing all of your lot with your oppressor and expecting your oppressor to one day decide he's going to treat you as his equal. And if he treated you as his equal, you essentially become disappear. So you disappear as a people. The third one is his role as a father and a husband made him a great leader. Malcolm projected this image of being a strong father and a strong husband. Now, that was an important characteristic. When we saw him, we didn't just see an articulate brother who with command of the English language, spoke well. We saw a father who could protect his wife, who was his wife's boyfriend, so to speak. So we saw a father of his children. So being a father was an extremely, his own family. So you have the family that he came from being important, and the family that he was a part of, that he was the husband of, being extremely important in terms of his leadership, what we saw in his leadership. Another aspect of this is his ability to identify with the masses of people. Malcolm did not see a class within the context of life. He did not give it. He was not a middle class guy. Let's face it. Malcolm was part of and able to identify with the most downtrodden elements in our community. Malcolm didn't go to college. He went to something like the 8th grade. Malcolm, that was an asset to his leadership, interesting enough, which kind of flies in the face of this notion of the talented 10th. We think of the talented 10th, which comes out of Du Bois, who is a Harvard graduate, as being the epitome of our leadership. Our leadership has to have PhDs. But when we look at it, our greatest leaders didn't get out of elementary school. When you look at Garvey, when you look at Elijah Muhammad, when you look at Malcolm X, you're talking about men who made tremendous contributions to leadership, who played tremendous leadership roles, who existed, whose frame of reference was out of the box. And when we say the box, we mean America. We mean the Western world. They did not fit in the mold, but they ended up being our great leaders. They ended up being those people who, in fact, led us in directions that offered us some real hope and some real possibility. They exemplified this hope and this possibility. So, I don't want to...
Just hold it right there, because we got some folks who want to talk to you, Baba Lumumba, when we get into all of those attributes that you mentioned. 800-450-7876. Miss Richardson is calling us from Maryland. She's on line 1. Miss Richardson, you're on with Baba Lumumba.
Yes, thank you so much. And Baba Lumumba, you are a blessing, dear please come back to Carl Show, because we need to, we need to learn. We, like Dr. Neely, he's saying we always learn, and he's always learning. Maybe that's what I got to do. Because, see, what I see in this country is so sad, because economics, like you're saying about the economic power base, that's important, Carl, you know that. And, I mean, without a power base economically, these people, the powers to be, the Anglo-Saxons, really, the ones that has the true wealth and all of this 1% wealth, they don't care anything about black people. And when we keep being divided economically, because years ago, look all the black businesses we had. We had them all over the place. They were flourishing.
Right. I'll tell you what, Ms. Richardson, we'll come up on a break. So could you put in a question for us so Baba Lumumba can respond?
Okay. Brother Obama, what has happened to us as far as all the business we used to have, and all of the black contractors seem to be out of the picture now. There's just a lot of Spanish contractors coming in all over the place. Could you answer that, and God bless you?
I'll tell you what, hang on a second, because we got to take the break. I don't want to interrupt your flow. Well, that's a question. That's an interesting question about what would Malcolm do, looking at the situation that we see right now. And she mentioned other folks coming into the country, especially, and I know what she's talking about, especially on the construction sites. I'll get your thoughts, Baba Lumumba, after this quick break. Folks, you want to join our conversation, reach out to us at 800-450-7876. Your calls after this short break right here on 1450 WOL, where information is power.